One day, while still a child, I sensed someone I knew would come looking for me. I was playing with some other kids and could see across the fields. Off in the distance, I saw the mule I had regularly ridden in my previous life. The sight of him filled me with tremendous joy, and I thought, at last, today my escort has arrived. I approached the travellers and asked, "Are you my escort?" Taken aback, their leader said, "Yes, but first tell us this. Who am I? Who is he? Whose horse is this? If your answers are right, we'll take you back with us." Without hesitation, I said, "You're Chakze, that's Urgen, that's Atsang's horse, Jangnak." Travellers bowed to me, picked me up and took me into their laps. But as a child of just 8 years, such lavish attention from virtual strangers made me feel awkward. So I up and ran away. A few weeks later, I was formally recognized. And a month or two later, I was officially enthroned at Kamshung Monastery as the reincarnation of their master. For centuries, Tibet existed in stasis. We knew nothing of the changes afoot in the world. Our relative economic equality made for a peaceful and contented society in which people's foremost concerns were securing a good death and a favourable rebirth to follow. In general, people adhered to a code of spiritual and secular ethics devised by a 7th century Tibetan king which fostered a noble culture. The nomads who lived in the nearby highlands brought meat, butter and cheese down to the Garje Valley to trade for grain, so we never worried for want. Garje was a prosperous place. No one oppressed us, and we paid no taxes to the Tibetan government. Nominally, Garje was under Chinese rule, but they imposed no special burdens or obligations apart from a loosely enforced annual tribute. I was just a boy, only 8 years old when the Chinese communists first invaded. My teacher at the time was Drime Abhan. When it came to introduce the nature of mind, Drime Abhan whispered the instructions through a conch shell, holding the wide spire to his mouth and the pointed end to our ears in deference to their esoteric nature. My chamberlain asked me, "What did Drime Abhan whisper in your ear today?" I teasingly replied, "Don't kill birds, don't kill birds." In fact, Drime Abhan had introduced me to the nature of mind. When I was 13 or 14, I was walking around the sacred site of Namcheng Dragkar when a gust of wind blew in. As it swirled before me, it held a sheaf of papers briefly aloft in the air, leaving a scroll of pages on the ground. I picked them up. They were covered in writing, though at first I couldn't make out the script. It wasn't written in Chinese or Tibetan, but another unfamiliar set of characters. Later that afternoon, when I opened the scroll and looked at it, it was all in Tibetan and easy to read. I set to copying the fragments and wrote perhaps 20 to 30 pages that evening. The scroll contained a meditation manual on the Diamond Keeper of Secrets, which depicts the Buddha Vajrapani with 3 faces and 6 arms, his body adorned with 8 wrathful deities. The Chinese communists had everyone fooled from the beginning. They paid their way from the eastern towns all the way to Lhasa by liberally dispensing silver coins. People took to saying, "Our kind parents, the Chinese communists, let loose a rain of silver coins." The common people were moved to sing songs praising the communist generosity, parental kindness, and benign presence. And at first that's how the communists behaved, but in hindsight we know it was just part of Mao Zedong's strategy to bring Tibet to heel. Before long, the communists began to declare the 3 overlords, the monasteries, chieftains and wealthy families, had the common people pinned under a stone. As far back as 1950, strange events had begun to occur in Garje. The valley was overrun with mice, frogs fell from the sky, and the rains didn't come on time. Foxes cried and wolves bayed as they ran through the villages during the day like dogs. There were landslides, the fields were parched, streams dwindled to nothing. We saw every bad omen you could imagine. We were hiding out from the Chinese in the high mountain when my friend and fellow Lama, Jamyang Sharab, said to me, "Return to the monastery. The Chinese aren't there yet. We're now outlaws and the Chinese no longer trust us. We might as well organize a militia." Once I'd established a military camp and took a head count, I found we had about 3,500 volunteers from the surrounding region. On our first mission, 25 of us went to ambush a Chinese convoy that had to pass through a ravine near Gangtok. It was a very steep defile, and we made sure we arrived at night. We ambushed the first and second trucks, which only carried 2 or 3 Chinese apiece. More Chinese trucks approached, but we were too few to challenge them. For a time, our militia was able to protect Garje and the monastery, which is commendable, but it came at the cost of the Buddhist teachings. My personal feeling was that killing and fighting would only invite more evil. In 1956, I turned 29. According to the prophecy I received in the dream of Shambhala, by the age of 30 I would lose control of and have to abandon my monastery. I took leave from the militia to consult with my mother, feeling in my heart I ought to give up the armed resistance and leave the region. My mother said, "You've spent the past months with the resistance. How can I simply sit by waiting to hear bad news? I've no appetite, I can't sleep. Your visit to me today is like a gift from the gods. Set this futile struggle aside and let's flee. Don't forsake your mother." I met with the local headman. They were all crying, tears streaming down their faces, asking why we weren't ashamed to be leaving the monastery. They said, "The monastery has yet to come to harm. Apart from our standing, the monastery is the only thing of worth we have. What are we to do if all of our lamas leave?" I admitted what they said was true. Our leaving would devastate the people of Garje. But I felt compelled to leave. To stay would mean I'd live to see the ruin of the gods.
Tene nga lo nyechi tsagune rongi ponshi miyele leonde te leonde te thoma ko acho se onde.
My karma and prayers led me to the Yeong Valley of the Po, and it was there that I developed a true following of devotees, the main one of my life. 1,000 or 2,000 people gathered in the upper reaches of the Yeong Valley to receive empowerments and blessings from me. We woke one morning to find the snow around our tents trampled. In the snow by my tent were paw prints left by a wolf, which looked as if they marked out a trail. After breakfast, the path we'd been following petered out. With no other option, we followed the wolf's tracks for 3 days, until one evening we reached a ridge overlooking Makyonglung Valley, where we offered prayers and prostrations. As my gaze rose from my first prostration, I looked up at a peak to see Guru Rinpoche seated in the midst of a nimbus of rainbows and light. We saw many wonders on that trip, which inspired the faith of the pilgrims and led to my becoming the main Lama in the Yeong Valley. Over the next year, people offered me horses, mules, cattle and goods. I didn't have to go knocking on any doors. We had all the food and drink we needed. In fact, I had it better than I did back home in Garje. At a certain point, I went on pilgrimage to Lhasa and spent the summer visiting all the major sacred sites. In time, I decided I would leave southern Tibet for India. Polu Khenpo, a fellow monk, came to see me one day and said, "That's unbelievable. Is it right for you, a reincarnate Lama who's supposedly devoted to other beings and Buddhism, to think only of your own safety? The blessed Buddha gained perfect wisdom and perfect freedom by forsaking his own aims and working solely for others, did he not? Give up your thoughts of India and follow the south bank of the Sangpo River to Pemako Chung. From there, search for a path into the hidden sanctuary of Pemako. If you can pioneer a route, we'll have 2 escape routes, one upriver and one downriver. That will thwart the Chinese efforts and help more people escape. That night, I dreamt of a beautiful young woman who held out a manuscript as she floated in the air and said, "I am a wisdom dakini. Later in life, a young woman named Drolkar who looks just like me will come to extend your life. If you join her, you will live out your full lifespan." When I opened the manuscript, I saw it was a guidebook with directions through Pemako's sacred landscape. Within 3 weeks of arriving, my mother fell ill with a fever. She received medical treatment, but nothing helped, and she passed away, the first of my many companions to do so. Most of the 10 or 20,000 refugees fell sick and died from one thing or another. Every day, 5 or 6 bodies were carried to the funeral pyres. The smoke of funeral pyres forever hung in the air. While living in a refugee camp, my fellow lamas performed divinations and said to me, "You made it into the hidden sanctuaries of Pemako. It now augurs well for you to settle on the outskirts of Pemako." With their encouragement, I signed up to help start a settlement near Pemako's border in northeast India. News spread and more than 200 people signed up to go with me. As the people of Pemako fled Tibet in the thousands, the settlement of Changlang swelled around me. I was the head of the Changlang settlement, and when the Dalai Lama summoned me to Dharamsala, the people of Changlang lost their leader. They didn't want to stay. They said they wouldn't live among aboriginals and began leaving for settlements all around India. For my part, I was assigned a position in the Tibetan government's Office of Religious Affairs. In March 1987, in the year of the monkey, I had a vision of the Nechung oracle at Drepung Monastery. The Nechung oracle has been a government fixture from the Great Fifth's reign to the present. As a theocracy, the Tibetan government consulted oracles on matters of state, and the Great Fifth Dalai Lama gave Nechung pride of place in naming him the chief state oracle. Samsara is beginningless. Each of us has been reborn endless times, here, there, and everywhere, in circumstances good and bad alike. I myself enjoyed good rebirths during the lives of Buddha Shakyamuni and Guru Rinpoche. And, due to the prayers I made then, I was born into the first Dalai Lama's inner circle towards the end of his life. My name at the time was Lhundrub Gatsal, and I went on to serve as personal secretary to the second Dalai Lama. Once the third Dalai Lama was born, I, or Lhundrub Gatsal rather, served as his personal tutor. During the life of the fifth Dalai Lama, I served him again as personal secretary. My name at the time was Jamyang Drakpa. Tibetan religion and culture have been shaped by the profound examples set by the early Buddhist kings, successive incarnations of Dalai Lama, and the lamas that lived in each valley. The spiritual culture can be seen and understood in the physical heritage they left, but that's no longer so for Tibet. A small portion of that heritage remains in Lhasa, but beyond that, most of the 5,000 or 6,000 monasteries that once covered Tibet have been destroyed, leaving no physical reminders behind. I felt a need for a monastery that exemplified Tibetan culture and what it had to offer in its pure form, and not just a pale imitation. On my retirement from government service, the Dalai Lama asked me to remain in Dharamsala, where I built a small Dharma center. A slow trickle of monks from Tibet arrived until we had about 40 or 50 monks. It was all right, but a strict discipline or routine was never established. This had partly to do with the building, which was built as a family home with small rooms and an inadequate temple. One day, I told His Holiness the Dalai Lama I was thinking of building a monastery, but didn't know if I'd be able to see it through. When His Holiness offered to do a divination, we decided we'd heed the divination's results, whatever they might be. No one ever dreamt I'd develop the relationship with His Holiness that I have. That relationship has grown through my years of government service, but has its roots in a connection forged over many lifetimes. Even now, I do whatever he asks of me, at least as far as I am able, serving him in my thoughts, words, and deeds.